Hello and welcome to this edition of Live and Ticking. The topic of today's event is the genetics of obesity and the heart. I'm Fearghal McKinney, head of BHF Northern Ireland. Obesity is a major risk factor for the development of many heart and circulatory diseases, such as heart attack, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. In recent years, rates of obesity have continued to rise, especially among young people, creating one of the most significant public health challenges facing our healthcare system today. However, obesity is a complex and multifaceted health issue, influenced by many different factors. Understanding the intricate balance between genetics and lifestyle choices is crucial for the development of effective strategies to support those with obesity. Investigating just that is BHF-funded researcher Dr. Mihir Sanghvi. Later in the webinar, we'll hear from Dr. Mihir about the research he's doing to improve our understanding of the biological mechanisms that cause obesity. We'll also be joined by Claire Berouche, who will share her personal experience of having a heart attack and the long journey she's been on to improve her health. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can submit them throughout via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. For the Q&A session, we'll also be joined by registered dietitian and nutrition lead at the BHF, Victoria Taylor, to help answer any diet or nutrition related questions. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A. However, if we're unable to answer your question, then you can call our heart helpline and speak directly to one of our cardiac nurses. You can also join our Health Unlocked community forum for support. This forum provides a safe space to discuss living with any heart or circulatory diseases. Finally, before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to ask you a quick poll question. And how would you rate your understanding of the genetics of obesity and the heart? We'll throw up a poll and you can now score that, 1 being very little and 5 being a lot. Just give you a second to complete that poll. Now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Claire Berouche. Claire will talk through her story with Ruth Huntman from the Heart Stories team at the BHF. Ruth and Claire.
Hi, thanks Fearghal. Claire, welcome. Thank you so much for giving up your afternoon. Lovely to see you as always. So it's been quite a journey you've been on. Can you tell us just briefly a little bit about events leading up to your heart attack? Because as is often the case, it just came out of the blue, didn't it?
It did, yes. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to the Live and Ticking to be able to tell everybody about my experience, basically. So I've been very well. I'm type 1 diabetic and have been since 1980. And I've always been well. I've always looked after my blood sugars, maintained them at the level they should be, eaten the correct things. I was a mum, 2 children, working, running the house. Everything was perfectly normal. Like I say, everything was just normal. There was nothing that was, to alert me to anything was wrong. But on the 12th, it was the 12th of August, everything changed. I mean, I didn't realize it was a heart attack at that point, but that's the date that it all started. I basically went to bed feeling very nauseous, thinking I'd eaten something a bit dodgy, or that I had picked up a stomach bug. And this was in Sunday afternoon. By Sunday night at about 1, 2 o'clock, things were getting a little bit worse. Still didn't have any pain. I had no pain in my chest, no pain in my jaw, back, arm, nothing. The only thing I had was this feeling of nausea, and I don't know how to describe it. It's like feeling anxious. It's how I'd imagine a panic attack to be, like waves of kind of feeling hot and like I say, and sick, but never actually being sick. So I spent the night in and out of the bathroom, as you do. And after, I suppose, 2 or 3 hours, things seemed to be slightly better. So I thought, well, I need to try and get some sleep. So I got back into bed and I must have just drifted off. This then went on into Monday. Like I say, just still feeling the nauseous. I had nothing else at all, just feeling nauseous, but I wasn't being sick. And this went on into the Monday, Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday, my husband said, you know, we don't want to leave it any longer because of my diabetes. I hadn't had anything to eat. I wasn't drinking much. So he just wanted to basically make sure and get some paramedics in attendance to just see what was going on. Sorry, I've completely lost thought.
No, so he rang 999.
So he called, like I say, he called the paramedics because he was worried about my sugars, despite the fact that they were all running fine. He was worried. So he called 999, and to begin with, the first responder showed up, and he took all the initial obs, blood pressure and one thing and the other, and he said it was all okay. There was absolutely nothing that seemed alarming at all at the time. So that was that. And then at that point, the ambulance crew arrived. Now, when an ambulance crew is in attendance, they aren't allowed to leave the patient until they've done an ECG. So the next thing I remember is being wired up to an ECG. And still, although I was feeling sick, I was also feeling quite secure, knowing that there were medical people and professionals around me. So I was just kind of sitting up, having a bit of banter as you do. And I just remember the female paramedic looking up at me and saying, "How are you feeling?" And I said, I feel okay. I still feel nauseous, but I feel okay. And she just looked at me. She said, "Well, I'm very sorry to tell you," she said, "you're having a heart attack." And I just couldn't believe it. And then from then, it just seemed to snowball. The next thing is I hear her saying to the guys that were waiting in the hallway, "We need a code blue, we need a code blue." And I'm still sat in bed thinking, code blue, does that mean lights? Because obviously that's the first thing that comes to your mind. It's the blue flashing lights. And I thought, no, that's not for me. It can't be for me. Why do I need blue flashing lights? And so she said, "I don't want you to do anything from here." She said, "You just lie perfectly still." And so they kind of got me out of bed onto the stretcher thing and took me downstairs and into the back of the ambulance. At this point, I still couldn't believe what was going on. I had, you know, I mean, I'd heard heart attack, blue lights, still didn't ring a bell to me. So my husband and myself were in the back of the ambulance on a blue light heading towards Hammersmith Hospital. And I was still sat there, despite having all these cannulas put in, oxygen masks put on, ECG things being wired up. I still sat there, and I said to my husband, I said, "We're going to get there and they're going to say I'm a fraud and, you know, just say bye and chuck me out the door," kind of thing. But that wasn't the case. When we got there, there were a whole load of nurses and doctors and all sorts of consultants waiting there. I was whisked through some double doors and straight into a cath lab. I didn't know at the time it was a cath lab. All I remember seeing are great big screens all over the place, a team of people behind a glass window, and then just lots and lots of people in green gowns and caps. I had a lovely nurse that stood by me at the top of the bed. And at this point, I was just starting to feel full up on the morphine, basically. And I think I just started to kind of drift in and out, in and out. And I must have eventually just drifted off, because the next recollection I have was approximately 3 days, waking up in ICU. So whilst I was in ICU, I'd had 2 stents put in and also a balloon pump inserted to try and keep my heart pumping as well as it could. When I finally came round in ICU, I had a lovely gentleman stood at the bottom of my bed, and he said, "Hi, Claire." I looked at him, and he said, "Do you have any idea who I am?" And I said, "No, not at all." He said, "Well, I'm Chris Baker. I'm the cardiologist that you saw when you came in as an emergency." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I had no recollection of it. So he said, "Well, I've got two." He said, "I've got good news and bad news." He said, "Which would you like?" And I said, "Either." He said, "Well, the good news is," he said, "you're alive. I'm here talking to you." And he said, "The bad news is," he said, "you're going to need a triple heart bypass." So I still believe at the time, it just wasn't sinking in. it still wasn't registering that this was me. This is me they're talking about. Anyway, I was then sent home. I was told to try and recover, just rest, relax, and let the heart, because there was so much troponin, which is the heart stress level all around the heart, that they didn't want to do anything with regards to a bypass there and then. So they sent me home in the October of 2012. I was taken back in and had the triple heart bypass. All seemed to be fine. They were happy with how things went. Then in the February, I started cardio rehab. These sessions go on for about 6, some go on for 8 weeks, but majority are 6. To begin with, all seemed fine. I seemed to be making a bit of progress, but I think it's about week 5 and then into week 6, things just seemed to feel much worse again. So I asked if I could go back to see the cardiologist rather than just kind of exit the cardio rehab program and just, have to wait however long to then see the cardiologist again. So I had an appointment made. I did get to see the cardiologist, and they started a whole load more of tests, heart scans, the echoes, the ECGs, the stress echo, all the sorts of normal tests that you get. And it took till about, that was the February, and it took till about the November before all these results came back again, because it takes a while, for it all to kind of feed back. And in the November, when I went back to see the cardiologist, he said, it's not good news, unfortunately. He said, I'm really sorry, he said, to have to tell you that you're in 3rd stage heart failure. Now, I just looked, and I mean, obviously, I'd known what a heart attack and cardiac arrest was and the difference between those, but heart failure, I had no idea what heart failure was and what it actually meant for me. So obviously, he started to discuss things and told me all about the state of my heart. And then I was obviously sent home and started on different courses of medication. Over the last 10 years, it's been 10 years, just over 10 years now, that it's taken for them to get the right kind of medication that I needed and the right dosage. And it's always changing, because heart failure never stays, it stays stable, but then it'll go off into a tangent. But the medication, like I say, it's just right now, and so I'm probably at the best I have been now.
Thanks, Claire. That's a really comprehensive, kind of candid account of what you've been through, which is a lot in quite a short space of time initially. Can I ask, was the psychological effects much worse than the kind of physical recovery? And can you describe some of the psychological toll it's taken on you briefly?
Yeah. Well, the physical toll was initially in the beginning, I think probably the first 18 months. The only way I could describe it was like being hit by a freight train, basically, only you probably wouldn't get up, but I had to. And it was hard. It was really hard going. Psychologically, that's ongoing. I don't think you ever get off that. I think once you've had a life-threatening event such as this, I think you go on a roller coaster ride, as I call it, because it's just your emotions are never the same. Everything you do, you've always got the thought of the heart attack in the back of your mind. And it didn't just affect me. It had what I call a domino effect. It affected my family, my husband, my children, my friends. And slowly, I had good days, I had bad days. On the bad days, I just didn't move, didn't do anything much. On the good days, I could see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. But most of the time, I was suffering bad with depression. And so I had counselling, and I also then was given some mindfulness, which is a great course. And that I find really helped me, and it gave me lots of tools to try and cope with all the different emotional things that come with heart attack and heart failure.
Can we just touch on a really positive aspect of something that's come out of something so awful and grueling for you, which is this unbelievable weight loss journey you've been on? I mean, you've lost over 10 stone in 18 months. Can you just briefly describe? And it didn't, you know, unfortunately, it started with a spell in hospital, and the weight loss wasn't intentional, but it's turned into something very positive for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I'd always been on the big side, but never what I call obese. But when I had my heart attack, obviously life becomes so much more sedentary. I couldn't get up the stairs in my house. I had to use a stair lift. If I was going out and about to a park or somewhere, I had to have my husband pushing me in a wheelchair or use a mobility scooter. So things were really, really hard. And like I say, I spent most of my days just sat around in the house, and I had to find new things to do, be it crocheting, adult colouring, writing. You know, you had to reinvent yourself, really. So that's what I did. Sorry, Ruth, what was the rest of the question?
Yeah, so the beginning of your weight loss journey actually started when you spent a prolonged period in hospital.
That's right. Yeah, it was March of 2022. I again was taken very poorly, and I had acute kidney problems. So I was taken into hospital, and I was kept in hospital for 5 weeks. At the end of the 5 weeks, I had lost quite a bit of weight. And so when I came out, I thought, well, you know, I might as well just try and carry on losing some weight. Besides the fact I just wasn't hungry. I had no appetite whatsoever, and I just wasn't hungry. So I just carried on. I think I lived off tomato soup for a good few months, and maybe a piece of toast with a bit of Marmite on it. And I could see the weight dropping off me. And as the weight was dropping off me, I was finding I was becoming more and more able to do things that I couldn't do with the weight on board. So it got me thinking, is it the heart failure that's making me feel so awful and not able to do things? Or is it also the addition of the weight that I've now put on? So anyway, as I started to lose weight, it just became a real focus. And it was just brilliant, because I had a really severe bad back up until this point. And at no point did I think that it could have been all to do with the weight that I was. And I went through so many different tests in the pain clinics and stuff, and nothing worked. And it didn't work because it was the weight I needed to lose. And when I started to lose this weight, like I say, it became something really, really positive. So I just kept going. And obviously then you start to see people, and the more you see people, the more they say, oh, you're looking great. What are you doing? So that was it.
And it's fair to say, I know you told me very recently that you feel the best that you felt since you had your heart attack, which is great.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Couple of final questions. I could listen to you all day, but got to give someone else a chance. So can you describe, I mean, you've been a hugely passionate supporter. You've done so much for us for like for the last 5 or 6 years. Can you tell me what hope our research brings to you, and why you support us so passionately?
For me, it all began, well, when you contacted me and asked me to tell my story. And then that's just snowballed. And for me, it's a way of giving back. It's my way of saying thank you and giving back. And also, I'm so passionate, like I say, because I didn't know anything about heart failure. So I'm extremely passionate about making sure that as many people as possible are made aware of what it's like and how it can affect somebody. Because when you look at somebody like me out in the street, you judge and you perhaps think, oh, well, they look fine, you know, but nobody realizes that on the inside, it's there's so much going on. You know, it's a real struggle from day to day. Even though I'm feeling good now, it's still a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And final question, I just want to give a little shout out, because, you know, for all that you've been through, you've been this tower of strength to other women who've suffered from heart attack and strokes and are kind of, you know, starting the journey that you went through, and you've been hugely supportive. And you do this through a Facebook group called Bell's Hearties, which you're an admin, although I like to say you run it because you're always on there supporting people. So has that been a source of comfort to you as well as them, sort of having this common experience you can talk about freely?
Oh gosh, definitely. I'd never been on Facebook, and it was my son who said to me, when I was, like I say, just twiddling my thumbs thinking, well, what can I do? He said, get on Facebook, Mum, there's heaps of things going on there. And I'd found a mixed group with gentlemen and ladies. And there was another lady on there called Elaine Harris, who had realised very quickly that how men and ladies deal with such a thing is very different. Women are much, much more sensitive, and they want to talk about it much more. So she set up, in 2016, she set up the group called Bell's Hearties. And before long, she asked me if I could be admin. So I helped out with the admin. And poor Elaine, I almost just took over the group then, because I just started doing these little posts, morning post, an afternoon post, a good night post. And even the simplest thing of just saying good morning to these ladies and have a nice day or good night, it meant so much to them, because they were going through what I'd been through, days in, days out, sat at home. You know, like I say, it's hard going. And so it was fantastic to be able to offer the support, because I think very often people say to you, oh, I understand, but you can't. Unless you've been through it, you can't possibly understand, you know, how much it can affect you. And so it's just fantastic to be able to be there and help some of these ladies that are just starting their journey.
Amazing. Well, Claire, thanks for taking the time today, and thank you for everything you do for those ladies and also for us. And take care of yourself.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Claire, can I echo that thanks, and also Ruth, can I thank you for joining in. And Claire, you'll return to us for questions after our second speaker, who's Dr. Mihir Sanghvi, who's going to talk about his fascinating research into the genetics of obesity. Over to you, Mihir.
Thank you, Fearghal. Thank you, Claire. It was a really fascinating and insightful story. I hope everyone can see the slides on the screen. Fantastic. So my name is Dr. Mihir Sanghvi. I'm a British Heart Foundation Clinical Research Fellow and also a Specialty Registrar in Cardiology. I'm based at the Barts Heart Centre at St Bartholomew's Hospital and the William Harvey Research Institute at Queen Mary, University of London. So to briefly run through what we'll be covering today, a few definitions, a bit of background about obesity in the UK, how obesity affects your risk of cardiovascular disease, a brief primer on genes and genomics, as I know that this is probably the least familiar aspect to many people, some rationale as to why I think it's important to study the genetics of obesity, and then a bit at the end about some of the work that we are particularly interested in regarding adipose deposits and how your genes and your lifestyle act together in concert. So at its simplest, an imbalance between energy input and energy output results in excess body fat, and that is what we call obesity. Obesity is a multifactorial condition, and therefore there are a number of things that influence it. Lifestyle behaviors such as eating habits, exercise and physical activity, socioeconomic factors, sleep duration, which was the topic of last month's live and ticking session, as well as our genetic makeup. These are things that affect us all. And in addition, one's medical history or what medication you're on, these can also affect obesity development, but are more dependent on individual circumstances. In the UK and elsewhere, we define obesity using body mass index. It's a relatively straightforward thing to calculate, and you can find these calculators online. Let's say you're 12 stone and you're 5'8". You convert that to kilograms and to meters. So 76 divided by 1.72 squared is 25.6 kilograms per meter squared, which would put you, therefore, in the overweight category. Body mass index is a useful metric because it's quick and easy to measure, doesn't require much equipment. but it's quite a crude measurement. So here are England rugby players, Carl Sinclair and Joe Marler. Their body mass index will probably be in the obese range, but the actual amount of fat tissue in their body will be relatively low. This is one of the limitations of BMI, and something we'll revisit later in the talk when I discuss about the more high resolution approaches we're using to investigate obesity. So is obesity an important topic to study? Well, unlike many other traditional cardiovascular risk factors like smoking, raised cholesterol, raised blood pressure, where we've made a good amount of progress over the last few decades, obesity rates continue to rise, with 2/3 to 3/4 of adults being classified as above the healthy weight. Obesity is responsible for 30,000 deaths in the UK, with 2/3 of those deaths being caused by cardiovascular disease. And as you all know, more recently, obesity was heavily implicated in mortality during the COVID pandemic. I think this is a really interesting chart because it highlights that obesity is something that affects individuals throughout the life course. So this graph demonstrates the prevalence of obesity in the most versus the least deprived English boroughs in Year 6 children, so 10 to 11 years old. What you can see is that the overall rates are absolutely higher in the most deprived, and that disparity is growing as time goes on. So those with more socioeconomic deprivation can expect to spend more of their lives in poor health, and obesity is a major driver of that health inequality. So let's now have a look at the relationship between obesity and the heart, focusing specifically on coronary artery disease, which encompasses conditions such as angina and heart attacks. So this data uses two overarching categories, which are metabolically healthy and unhealthy. Those who are classified as unhealthy had 3 or more of these risk factors here. So blood pressure, cholesterol, high blood sugar or diabetes, high triglycerides, and an increased waist circumference. In this chart, we take the metabolically healthy who have a normal weight as our reference group. And what you can see is that even if you have no other cardiovascular risk factors, just being overweight or obese, your risk of developing coronary artery disease goes up by 26 to 28%. So your risk of having angina or having a heart attack increases by 26 to 28% just because you have a BMI above the healthy range. When we combine obesity with other risk factors, so here we have the metabolically unhealthy who are obese, you have a doubling again in risk compared to those who are metabolically healthy. So your risk goes up even more substantially, and that highlights the interplay between traditional cardiovascular risk factors and obesity. So when I say I'm a cardiologist, almost everyone knows what that means. But when I say my research area is statistical genomics, people understand that much less. So I wanted to describe a few things briefly to help put everything into context. So all living things, bacteria, plants, animals, have a genome. And a genome is essentially our DNA. The information encoded in our DNA makes everything in our bodies work. The human genome is extremely large. So if I were to read out mine, saying 1 DNA base every second, it would take me over 100 years. So it's really, really big. Everyone in attendance today has a genome that is 99.9% identical. But because of the genome size, there are still around 3 million areas of DNA which are different. And our research involves trying to find those areas of DNA that are responsible for causing differences and why some people are more predisposed to obesity than others. Many of you will have heard of conditions such as cystic fibrosis or sickle cell disease. These are what we call monogenic diseases, whereby there's a single change at a single point in the DNA that results in pathology. Traits such as obesity or height, or diseases like coronary artery disease or type 2 diabetes, these are more complex and known as polygenic diseases. And the analogy here is to consider an orchestra. In a monogenic disease, the orchestra is playing perfectly, But let's say the trumpet section, for example, makes a major and glaring mistake. The error, it's so significant that it changes the entire performance. That's a monogenic disease. So now imagine another performance where no single musician makes a big mistake, but instead several players are slightly off in their timing. Individually, if we looked at those errors, we might not notice them, but collectively, they change the music's overall sound. And this is like a polygenic disease. Several areas of the genome have minor variations, and together they increase the risk or cause a condition. And that's what my research involves, trying to find out where those areas of variation are. So why is doing this type of research helpful? Well, obesity is a complex condition, but we know that there is a heritable component. So data from studies that look at twins or look at families estimate that 40 to 60% of the variation in body mass index can be attributed to your genetics. Understanding how genetic variation affects obesity helps us to understand its architecture and therefore discern why some individuals are at greater risk than others. Identifying the genes that are associated with obesity risk can help us understand the molecular and cellular pathways, for example, in the brain or in the liver or in the fat tissues, all of which can contribute to obesity. And in turn, by identifying those pathways, it can help us figure out, for example, where drugs could be targeted. Having information from the genome, we can build up a much more comprehensive picture of an individual and their predisposition to a certain trait or condition. And in so doing so, we can move away from this one-size-fits-all approach to a more targeted approach where we take into account the fact that we are all different. So let's look at some data again. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned how BMI, body mass index, can be a bit of a crude approach to determining obesity. And I'll try and demonstrate why that's the case here. So here, some colleagues have used machine learning algorithm to identify 3 different types of fat deposits in the body. So the first is visceral adipose tissue. Visceral adipose tissue is the fat that sits around your internal organs, like your liver or your spleen. Then we have abdominal subcutaneous adipose tissue. That lies around your trunk, and it's probably what we'd commonly refer to as a gut. And then the third is gluteofemoral tissue, and that's the type of fat that lies around your bottom, hips, and thighs. Interestingly, all of these people, 3 completely separate people who've been scanned, have a BMI of 29, but rank in the top percentile for 3 completely different fat deposits. So is all fat the same? This data sort of suggests that it's not. Visceral adipose tissue, the one that lies around your internal organs and is coded in pink here, is associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes or coronary artery disease. When we consider gluteofemoral fat, for example, green, having increased amounts of gluteofemoral fat appears to have a protective effect, so your risk appears to be lower. Now, this needs further teasing out and further investigation. But when we look at the genetics of these different fat deposits, we can see that there is very little overlap in terms of the genes responsible for all of these different fat deposits. That kind of indicates that their biological functions are different, and ultimately how they affect your risk of developing different cardiovascular and metabolic diseases is different as well. We're also interested in other fat deposits, in particular, the fat that lies around your heart, which is known as pericardial fat. So this is a cardiac MRI scan, and I know that people will be interested. So just to orientate everyone, spine here at the back and your vertebra, chest wall here at the front, left ventricle, right ventricle, left atrium, right atrium, mitral valve flapping away there, and your tricuspid valve here. For once, I'm not worried about what's actually going on inside the heart, but I'm interested in this white material you can see outside the heart muscle. This is what we call pericardial fat, and we'll be investigating what pericardial fat can teach us about the genetics of obesity in the coming months. The other aspect of my work is to examine how our genetic risk is modified by our lifestyle. In the last 30 years, obesity has doubled, but our genetic makeup does not change in that time frame. We're not a different species compared to 30 years ago. What has changed is our environment, and this is termed the obesogenic environment. Lifestyles are more sedentary, available of calorie-dense food has increased, portion sizes have grown, sugary snack food is cheaper than healthy alternatives, we walk less and drive more, and factors such as marketing and advertising, historically on TV, but now on social media, it shapes young people's preferences from an early age. So all of these things can interact with our genome. Only in the last few years have we had the ability to formally quantify and examine the relationship between lifestyle and our genome. This is because in order to gain valid results from our statistical experiments, we need very large sample sizes. For example, but that's not to say that we haven't got some data which point to this being an attractive approach. For example, for those who carry a specific change in one of the genes that promote obesity, known as the FTO gene, by being physically active, the risk of obesity can be reduced by 27% when comparing to those who are physically inactive. So as such, and the last thing I'll say for now, is that developing obesity is not necessarily programmed or fated, even though we know genetics plays a role. By incorporating healthy lifestyle behaviors, risk can be mitigated. And with that, I'll stop and looking forward to taking any of your questions. Thank you.
Here, thank you very much. Indeed, very illuminating. And there's really questions coming into the chat, and we'd like to welcome back now Claire and Victoria Taylor, who's also here to help with your questions. And Claire, you'll not be surprised that the first ones in are asking you a couple of things. One is congratulations first on the weight loss, but how has losing all that weight affected your ongoing treatment?
Well, the weight loss was mainly due to cutting out carbs, which seems strange because being a type 1 diabetic, and people are always saying that with diabetes, it's important to keep your carb ratio and your insulin tight. However, I found that by cutting out carbs rather than calorie counting, I've actually managed to lose all this weight. It's not easy. Counting carbs is very, very difficult. Cutting out carbs is very difficult because almost everything you look at has carbs in it. But losing the weight, like I say, is the incentive. It's all you need. Once you start to see the weight coming off, and you start to feel the difference and the benefit that it actually makes to your heart health, it's just amazing. It really, really is. And like I say, I just feel the best that I felt since 2012 when I had the initial heart attack and then was told I was in heart failure. I really thought that was it. There was no way back that I'd ever be able to sit here like this now, feeling the way that I do.
Good, thank you, Claire. Next question, Dr. Mihir, what do you think is the future of treatment for obesity?
That's an excellent question. I think I would sort of split it into a few different domains. I think the idea of understanding people's genotypes a lot better and the move towards personalized medicine, but also getting more information about how healthy behaviors can affect your risk, and that's the work that we're doing, will really be a gateway towards targeting lifestyle advice to individuals and how that can sort of improve without having to resort to interventions such as medication or surgery. Bariatric surgery is is a burgeoning sort of discipline and has made significant advances over time, but it's not a panacea and it's not something that's available to all. So, but surgically, the technical things on that side are improving. And then the other category is medications. And there's been a lot in the press recently about the glucagon-like peptide 1 analogs, things like the trade names Ozempic, for example, which have been in the news, which are generally drugs for diabetes, but have been demonstrated to have significant impact upon weight loss. I think it's a very, very early stages of that being incorporated into practice, and only time will tell as to what the future of that is. But the future is looking bright in terms of on all three sides: lifestyle, medication, and surgery.
Okay, just back to you again, Claire, and it's about your lifestyle now. And how has your life changed after losing the weight?
Completely. Like I say, beforehand, I was using mobility scooter, wheelchair, stair lift to get up the stairs. Now, I can't remember the last time I used any of them, actually. I'm just able to go out now. I can walk further. It's just completely changed my life. Everything that I couldn't do, I'm now doing, and I'm doing it. Yes, I get breathless and I have to stop and start, and I have to do it my way, and always kind of think about what I'm doing and how much I'm pushing myself. But it's just brilliant. Like I say, having lost the weight, I just feel absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it's well worth it.
Thank you very much. Maybe this one for you, Victoria, and I'll read it out just as it's written. Do you think it's a common problem that keeps people from seeking treatment in time? The idea that you're actually fine or a fraud is the way the questioners asked that.
I mean, yes, I think obviously if you think there's something wrong with you, you need to go and talk to your doctor about it. That's the most important thing. I think in terms of weight, sometimes people, we know, because they feel a stigma around being overweight, that they're going to be judged if they go to seek health advice, or that every time they go to the doctor, they're going to be asked about their weight. And I would say, you just have to remember from your health professional's point of view, they're not judging you on kind of what you look like, or, all of those kind of societal things. They're just interested in your health. But also sort of to take control of that consultation yourself. If you don't want to talk about your weight, then you can say that, and your health professional will respect that. So definitely don't let it put you off seeking help. If you think that there's something wrong, go and get it checked out.
Thanks, Victoria. Mihir, again, is genetics the reason why most people who lose weight regain it within 2 years? And what hope can genetic therapies give people who struggle to keep weight off?
It's quite a complex topic. So weight regain after weight loss is probably a slightly different story to developing obesity de novo. There's quite a lot of changes that the body undergoes in terms of how it regulates energy expenditure, how it regulates appetite, and some of the other metabolic parameters. And obesity, as I sort of explained during the talk, is a very polygenic trait. So many genes will contribute to its manifestation, and many genes control those things that are involved in eating behaviors, appetite, fat storage, and things. So I'm not entirely sure that there's genetic therapy which was going to be able to is on the horizon for anything like that, given that our understanding of obesity is still, the genetics of obesity is still quite incomplete. But if we were able to identify that for a certain subgroup of people who carry specific variants, this lifestyle intervention is particularly fruitful, then maybe along that path we could maybe think about how clinically we could start to employ some of those strategies.
Okay, there's another one in here. They're talking about what about people who are underweight and not being represented in the data? Is there a link there between it and heart?
Again, so I think the biological mechanisms are slightly different, and the data that I presented here has been focusing on those with higher BMIs. If you're looking at the underweight spectrum, the challenges with respect to heart health are slightly different, more about the energy substrates that the heart uses to create energy. But it's not something that I'm overly familiar with, but there will be data surrounding that, just not presented here today.
Okay. Either of you, Mihir or Victoria, if you lose weight, how do you know if you've lost visceral fat from around your organs?
It's a, it's a very good question. The issue with the high resolution approaches are that you need to have a body scan. So MRI is what we've been employing in studies like the UK Biobank, which is a large scale population study. MRI obviously doesn't use any radiation, and therefore it's attractive. However, if you are thinking about losing weight, I wouldn't be too hung up about what fat you're losing. Just try and start the journey. It's just because you think you have more fat in a certain area, it probably doesn't necessarily mean that they will correlate in that way. But if you know that, if we were to all know that we had lots of visceral adipose tissue, then maybe that would be a great sort of jump start to saying, oh, I better try and think about losing some of this weight. But I'm just not sure that there's a population strategy that we can employ to screen everybody for that particular issue.
And one directly for you, Victoria. This person says, I want to lose weight, but I don't know where to start. Is there someone at BHF that can help me?
Oh, I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like this massive mountain you have to climb, and people have often tried to lose weight before and not been successful. My advice is always to start small. You know, if you've got 10 stone to lose, don't focus on losing the 10 stone, just focus on making one change that will improve your diet this week, and then think about the next change and keep going. If you're not sure what changes you need to make, even start by keeping a food diary, and that will just give you an idea of what your normal patterns are and where you're going wrong. It might be a particular time of the day, it might be, you know, that you're fine Monday to Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday is where it kind of goes wrong. So try and sort of, you know, identify, be a bit more individual, I suppose, about how you do it, and identify, you know, what things will help you, and the things that you can stick to as well. Don't worry what your friend's doing, your partner, the rest of your family. You know, everyone's got an opinion on weight loss and what you should do, but just focus on what's right for you and start small and build to a bigger effect.
Yeah, this David saying he lost 30 kilos on keto. That's a particular type of diet, but I felt very unwell, he says, and when I stopped, the kilos came back. So what about he's referring here to a new pill? Is it a miracle drug? Is he aware of a new pill?
I'm not sure what
I'm not sure what
the drug is, but I would say with low carbohydrate diets, there is some evidence that they can be effective. So Diabetes UK and SACN came out with a report, I think it was last year, saying that lower carbohydrate diets can be an effective short-term approach for people with type 2 diabetes. But that's lower, not very low. And what we do find is that it is just so difficult to stick to a very low carbohydrate diet. And even people that do sort of feel that they were more successful with that over time generally increase their carbohydrate intake a bit. So it's more of a kind of a moderate intake. For most of us, it's a more moderate approach is really just look at the type of carbohydrates you're eating, because actually where we tend to be going wrong is that we're focusing more on those kind of simple or more refined carbohydrate foods. So, you know, sugary foods and drinks, and low fiber carbohydrates, things like white pasta, white bread, those sorts of things. So make those changes first before going down a more drastic route of really cutting the carbohydrates significantly. But a lower carbohydrate diet is 50 to 130 grams of carbohydrate a day. So to give you an idea of what that means, so Claire's nodding, she knows. So 30 grams of carbohydrate is like 2 Weetabix, for example. So that gives you an idea of, you know, roughly how much carbohydrate that would be in a day.
Yeah. Ronald Collins, thanks you, Claire and Mihir, saying a very clear message comes through: eat better and exercise more. But he asks what can be done for people who are unable to eat properly or exercise, and he's thinking particularly the elderly.
I think that's a really, really good point. the thing I would say about exercise is that there is always something that you can do, but it just might need significant modification. It might just need some moving around, it just might need some assistance. But whether you're just sitting in a chair doing some leg lifts, or using your shoulders to strengthen these proximal muscles, which in the elderly, the hips and the shoulders are often the muscles that become weakest first. There is always probably something that you could do, and I'd advise people to get in touch with the GP or the physiotherapy, local physiotherapy services, who can always offer exercises that you can do in the context of your specific limitations. Exercise is something that everyone can probably do. We just need to figure out what is best for your individual circumstances. And also healthy eating, again, it's a massive challenge to try and find food that is amenable to you, which you can tolerate, which is cost effective, which has all the nutrients that you need. I don't proclaim to have any good answers for that, but I think just trying to think about what you can do in the context of your own personal circumstances, that's a really, really good first step. And then with your local services, trying to figure out how they could potentially help you, particularly around exercise. I think that's something that can be done for everybody.
Yeah, there's a specific question for you from Jane. Is there anything that surprised you about your research, and why do you think it's important to talk about research like this to members of the public?
I'm always being surprised by the research that's being put out. In research, you always have to be a bit skeptical as well, making sure that methods and how people have performed their research sort of passes muster. But in the data that I presented, the gluteofemoral fat, so the fat around the bottom and the hips and the thighs, and how it potentially has a protective effect, so for some diseases such as type 2 diabetes, it is incredibly interesting. I don't know what the mechanisms are, but by doing the genetic study, figuring out what genes are related to gluteofemoral fat, and then investigating the pathway, the molecular pathways and things, we can maybe see where there's a crossover and why it might be protected. In terms of, I love talking about research to patients and to the public. I think it's incredibly important, because ultimately that's why we're doing all of this. This is not so that I can put my name on some publications and I can post on Twitter about what I've done. There's not, some people do it for those reasons, but ultimately the most important is to be able to hear stories like Claire's. The journey that Claire's been on and the interventions that she's had have only been made possible by organizations like the British Heart Foundation and the researchers that are funded by the British Heart Foundation doing various types of research. And whilst it might take some time, the research that I do today might not translate clinically for a decade or more, but it's that gradual process of starting and trying to find out new things that hopefully eventually will be translated into the clinic and lead to better outcomes for all of the patients that come to our hospitals and to our clinics and to our GP surgeries. That's the only reason that that's important. And being able to share some of that journey at an early stage and do it unfiltered, not via the newspapers or via anything else, but having a researcher directly talk to people, I think that's incredibly powerful. And I'm always amazed by the perspectives that are brought to me by these sorts of events. Things that I've never even considered thinking about or looking at in a certain way comes from talking to patients and the public about our research. And I think it's incredibly important.
Okay, another popular question here. Which foods are responsible for the plaque deposits in our arteries?
Victoria?
So yeah, I'll take this one. So in terms of, it's really about cholesterol and atherosclerosis. So there are a number of things that you can do. The primary one that we talk about, and actually what we're learning more of is that it's about our whole diet. So people do sort of focus in on one risk factor, but actually it's about eating a balanced diet and looking at that whole diet to sort of get all of the risk factors that diet can impact on. But specifically in terms of cholesterol. It's about the types of fats that we're having. So people often think that we are going to be talking about a very low fat diet when it comes to reducing cholesterol, but it's actually about the types of fats that we're eating. That's sort of how the nuance has changed more recently. So switching from saturated fats, things like butter, lard and ghee, palm oil, coconut oil, to unsaturated fats. So that's things like olive oil, which we know from the Mediterranean diet. It's the fats that are in things like oily fish, nuts and seeds, sunflower oil, rapeseed, those sorts of things. So making that switch so that you are not necessarily lowering the amount of fat that you're eating in total, but you're getting better kind of fat when you are having fat. And then there's other things that you can do. I mean, obviously eating more fruit and vegetables because of the type of fibre that's in them can help to lower cholesterol. And the same goes for things like oats and barley. And yeah, a sort of a variety of other foods, things like beans, lentils, those sorts of things. So they all contain this thing called soluble fibre, and that can help to lower your cholesterol levels as well.
Thanks, Victoria. Mihir, can you say to what extent pericardial fat influences heart health?
I'd love to be able to tell you immediately, but I haven't done the analyses yet. It's a very interesting phenotype, and what we're interested in is looking at these what we call ectopic deposits of fat. So fat where it's not visible, but it's collecting. We don't know how heritable it is, so we don't know whether it's something like visceral adipose tissue, which is quite heritable. We don't know, and we don't know what the genetic pathways that underlie it are. So once we do that work, hopefully I'll be able to have a better answer. But it's something interesting for us to look at. And as I said before, now that we're imaging more and more people, we're able to have the statistical power to investigate these things that we haven't been able to investigate before. So it's a really, really exciting time to be involved in this type of research.
And there's a question in here are some people genetically predisposed to not losing weight?
I'm not sure that I can give you a good answer for that, to be perfectly honest. I think with the gene lifestyle interaction analyses that we're doing, what we're showing is that even if you are genetically more predisposed to obesity, there are still things that you can do lifestyle-wise that can mitigate against that risk. So if you were, the example I gave with the FTO gene, FTO is one of the most famous and well-researched genes that are implicated in obesity. But if you compound that, so if you carry a risk allele, so if you carry a genetic variant that increases your risk of developing obesity in that gene, if you compound that by being physically inactive, for example, your chances of becoming obese are much, much higher. However, if you try and mitigate against that risk by being physically active, you can definitely reduce your chances. So there is certainly people are predisposed to obesity, but there is lifestyle things that you can do to mitigate against it. And I don't think that we should, I just don't think that the way that the research will go will demonstrate that some people are just incapable of losing weight. Unless you have a monogenic form of obesity, so a specific syndrome and things like that, that's a slightly different story. But for polygenic obesity, the obesity that's predisposed by having many, many changes in different variants, I think there is always something that can be done.
Okay, and the final question, I'm going to fire this one over to you, Claire. 4 people want to know the answer to this. What keeps you so positive during your heart attack and diagnosis?
I get asked that many, many times. In my mind, you have to stay positive. What else? You don't have a choice. I mean, people say to me, how do you stay positive? I just do. Like I say, there's no point sitting in a corner, wallowing in whatever's happened, thinking, oh gosh. You have to get on. Life continues. You have to get on. You have to be positive. It's the only way. I believe that a good, positive mind also gives you strength and helps you heal.
Okay, Claire, thank you very much indeed. Victoria, thank you. And Mihir, thank you as well. And thank you for watching this edition of Live and Ticking, and thank you for your questions. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from all our brilliant speakers. As always, we'd like to do a little poll a final poll question. How would you rate your understanding now of obesity and the heart? And once again, I'll give you a little second just to vote on that. And remember, if we haven't managed to answer your questions today, we encourage you to visit our Heart Helpline, where you can contact our dedicated clinical team about your query. All our incredible research is funded 100% by you, the public. If you've been inspired by any of what you've heard today, then you can support our life-saving work through a donation link that will be posted shortly. Live and Ticking is a monthly webinar series, and we strive to produce the best events possible for you, our audience. Your feedback and comments are crucial to help plan and develop future events. So we ask if you can complete the survey at the end of this event or through an email that you'll receive shortly. We'd be grateful. This Live and Ticking event was recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel from next week. Our next event will take place on the 27th of September, titled What is Takotsubo? Thank you again for watching today, and goodbye.